talking. It's a Law at the Core show. I've been here for a couple of months on Law at the Core. We've got the guys with us this evening. Co-hosts on the show, Carl Blackburn, Daniel Adejumo, and we also have our guest this evening. She's been here before, Roxanne Buckley. So let's move on. As I said, apologies for the late start, but it happens sometimes. It's been a very, very busy day. Topic for this evening, we've touched on it. We've tried to touch on it on the search engine on a couple of shows, but we've not really been able to get into it in any kind of real analytical kind of way, which we're hoping to do this evening with these guys. We're talking about that report, the named alias name of the SEUK report, the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. And there's some of the things, those are the things that's been going on in the media that kind of link to that, and I'm sure we'll be able to touch on that also this evening. But as always, your views and opinions are wanted, needed, and much, much, much appreciated. Text line 07959964626. Also the phone line 01612222636. We are also live this evening on Facebook and on YouTube. Facebook, SEUK Global, and YouTube Legacy 90.1. So just before we go to the break, let me say good evening and a welcome to the guys. Okay, let me see. Okay. Hiya, can you hear me okay? Who's that tapping away there? Is that you, Daniel? He's not. Hiya, can you hear me okay?
Can't hear over the typewriter.
Is that you, Daniel? Yeah. Is that Daniel on the time? I'm gonna have to turn him off. Huh? Okay, can you hear me, Carl? Hello, Carl? No, you're not. All right. I didn't mute you up.
Hello?
I think I did. Sorry. Okay. Are you there now? Have you muted yourselves? All right, Daniel. Daniel, you can hear me, can't you? All right, Carl. Yeah, you're unmuted now. Good evening.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, well done.
Right,
Hi.
Daniel, you can hear me, can't you? All right, Carl. Yeah, you're unmuted now. Good evening.
Ah, that's better.
Hi.
Hello. Well done. Right, Daniel, you can hear me, can't you?
Right. Okay. Let me just see this. Have any of you got? That's better. Can you? Right, Kyle. Hello. Can you hear me, Kyle? Hello, Roxanne.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Roxanne can't hear me. So we're working. So it's not our problem. It's not my problem, is it?
Can you hear me, Carl?
I can hear you, but
Hello?
if there's like it's then it's coming back
Yeah,
again.
I can hear you.
But have you got? But have any of you got the show on your device?
Right. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Because if you've got it on playing in the background, it will feed back and stuff. So
I don't know. It maybe it opened twice at my end. I don't know. Sorry about that. Anyway.
Yeah, definitely got you now. And Daniel, you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Well done. Okay, let's
Hang on.
again.
I think you're playing out of my speaker, which is in the front room.
All right. Yeah, I think it was happening with Kyle as well. But I mean, you can turn it off. We are going to go for a break in just under a minute. But so just a real quick introduction, really, more so to welcome Roxanne back to the show, and just give us in say 30 seconds. No, in fact, yeah, Kyle, you can introduce the show, or who is the best person to give us what we're going to be talking about. Go on, Kyle.
Well, I'll kick off with one of the subjects, which is looking at the SEUK race report, which was commissioned by the government by a panel of independent experts. So Roxanne will very helpfully be taking us through some of the highlights of that report. And we will also hopefully be touching upon COVID and potentially the government's suggestion of COVID passports, amongst other things, and how that may impact on the local community, if indeed it is introduced.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's come up right to the time. So as soon as we come back, we'll go straight into that. I mean, the advert's like 3 minutes, so I will come back to you and we can have a little chat. We still will be live online, but the listeners won't be able to hear us. But if we get to anywhere interesting, listeners, we will, of course, bring that back to you. So we'll be right back. It's Law at the Core. Get involved. Let us know what you think. See you in a bit.
Feel the vibe on Legacy.
We want to end.
Looking very well, Anthony, I have to say.
Pardon?
Looking very well and dapper there.
I am flustered.
To say the least, join the club.
It's been an absolutely crazy busy day today.
Yeah, likewise. Was that? Can I just ask? Was the sound the sound in my front room playing through the mic?
It was
Because my flatmate is on a date in the front room, and I think the speaker is connected somehow to the computer. So you were playing in the front room, and I just hope that his conversation wasn't playing through that mic onto Legacy FM.
It was getting a bit hot around here, I have to say.
I don't know what's going on in there, but it's nothing to do with me. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it was more like repeating, just in the background, just getting that echo going on there and stuff. So what's been going on for you quickly, in the sense of, I watched a bit of you were on doing a discussion. Was it yesterday, Kyle?
Was it a BSN talk about insolvency?
I think so. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Just been the days are blurring into one, to be honest. For us, it's year end, so everyone's just trying to tidy up and basically bury some skeletons before the new financial year. It's been busy. I think probably everybody, who's in law is saying the same thing. Doesn't really matter where you are. It's just busy constantly at the moment.
Wow. I'm just thinking if your speaker's still going on there, Daniel, I can hear something coming.
Can you hear muffled conversation and a bit of music?
Yeah, more than muffled conversation.
Is it really loud?
No, it's not really loud. I'll focus on you when you get to speak. It just might mean that I might have to mute you sometimes if it's too much, or you mute and then you just unmute yourself when it's.
I'll do that. I'll mute myself when I'm not speaking, and then when I'm unmuted, hopefully my voice will carry above the background noise.
Okay. So a lot of things happening for BSM at the moment. Then, particularly, you did the again another area was because you did the reflection on the report, the Law Society report. The event was that last week. You're muted, Kyle.
Classic. So that was penned by
Well, hold on that, because we're going to come back.
Legacy 90.1.
Okay, and welcome back. You are in tune to the search engine. This is the Law at the Core show with the co-hosts Kyle Blackburn and Daniel Adejumo, and our guest this evening, Roxanne Buckley. Just before, during the break, I just asked Kyle, what's going on at the moment with BSM. I know I've been getting a lot of notifications about the events that's been going on, and one in particular was the review of the Law Society report, which was done by Professor Gus John. So Kyle was just going to give us some quick feedback on that. Yeah,
so just generally speaking,
Go on. Hello? I hear you. Hold on. Sorry. Go on, Carl.
No, it's okay. Yeah, so generally as BSN, we try and we're quite selective with reports that we'll comment on. Obviously, if there are more watershed events like the Sewell report, which we'll touch on later, the issue that we have is, though, because BSN is effectively a very broad church, we have to be seen as representing the views of all of our members, which is very hard to do with 4,000 to 5,000 members. But generally, what we look at is trends over the years. I think that generally speaking, and possibly with the exception of the Sewell report, generally the trend is that things are getting better, but there is still an awful lot to be improved upon. I think where the Sewell report, and we'll come on to this shortly, but I think that paints more of an optimistic picture. So yeah, as I say, we tend to only comment selectively. So yeah.
45,000 members.
Yeah, and growing.
So where are they all? So why are they not arguing with you tonight?
They're probably wiser than I am.
Well, all the more reason for them to get on. We need to get some of these numbers up so we can get this legal debate going. Because I even go on it about it sometimes. And I think I said to you at the time when you were in here and Anthony Brown and we had that lawyer on from America, and you just got into your lawyer role.
Yeah, I mean, I think most lawyers tend to keep their counsel, not usually want to air their own views, because I mean, the nature of being a solicitor or a barrister is you just don't know what clients you might be expected to represent. And so I think that many, especially in the mid to top tier firms, generally find it difficult to have a public opinion.
There's probably an interesting anecdote on that quite recently. I think is it One Essex Chambers, a group of barristers from that chambers wrote a article, I think it was, critical of the Chinese government's treatment of is it the Uyghur Muslims? And essentially the Chinese state has now sanctioned that chambers. And so Chinese individuals, Chinese businesses are not allowed to do business or essentially instruct that chambers. And so you've seen a bit of an exodus, actually. Quite a few barristers have left One Essex Court because they have clients in China. So that does, I think, illustrate that there is sometimes some risk to, being candid when it comes to controversial, or in that case, not even in this country. It's not controversial in this country that the Uyghur Muslims are mistreated by the Chinese government, but even saying something as seemingly innocuous as that can have huge consequences for your firm. So
isn't part of the whole role of a lawyer is objectivity, to be able to, even knowing that probably somebody may have committed certain crimes or done certain things wrong, but you, regardless of that, your role is to defend them despite your views.
Yeah, so this wasn't a courtroom situation where the chambers were acting for anyone against the government. So this was very much those barristers commenting in their personal capacity. I'm not sure if they wrote the article or put their name to it, but this wasn't work for them. This was them just putting something out there, showing some solidarity with the Uyghur Muslims, and they've been sanctioned for that by the Chinese state.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, and that's like, a really, I suppose, extreme example of it, and rightly so. The Bar Standards Board, which regulates barristers, came out in favour, as did the Law Society, basically saying that it's an affront, basically, to justice to effectively censor barristers, especially given that barristers are independent. and don't necessarily, even though they work in a chambers, they're all actually self-employed.
Okay.
And so what the law says for barristers is you've got what's called the cab rank rule. And that essentially is to ensure justice, especially in criminal trials, which the idea, and often people who practice criminal defense can be asked the question, how can you defend so-and-so? The idea of the cab rank rule is basically a barrister can't normally turn down a brief if they are available. And so because that is such a fundamental tenet of the way the bar operates, what effectively the Chinese government, and I think part of actually the blog that they were writing, I think some of it was commissioned. I think they were giving advice on a paid brief. And I think that what the backlash there is that effectively you are stopping justice because you're overriding, which is centuries old safeguards, because people at the extreme end of that have now felt that they can't speak out. And I think that what was surprising is that their chambers actually came out and distanced itself from that blog and said basically the barristers don't represent that chambers, which I think raised eyebrows, and certain pieces were written to say whether that was right or wrong to do that. Coming back to the question, Antti, about why don't more BSN solicitors get involved? It's the same thing in a sense that often you do, and it's generally in your private life as a regulated professional, which is what we are. You have to be very careful, and I think when we speak to students, we talk about the social media posts and how that can come back to haunt them in later life. Having a radio show or putting a blog out there, you just don't know where in 5 or 10 years, if somebody can hold that up against you and say, at the worst, a client could turn around and say, well, I'm not instructing your firm because one of your solicitors or your barristers gave quite a stinging rebuke of something that they did. And I think that's always the issue in the back of a lot of lawyers' minds, is that, and it does happen where people just give flippant comments and wade into things. And so I think that's why sometimes lawyers can come across as being very conservative with a small c, but actually it's done thinking, well, I don't know who will instruct me tomorrow or years down the line, so we've got to be careful. And I think, So
this is coming really down to personal ethics, isn't it? There's some people who will then see it as this could harm my career. Then you'll have those who says, well, look, this is something that is in my heart, something that I feel strongly about, and I'm going to talk out about it. I ain't saying that there isn't lawyers in this country who are speaking out about certain things very, very strongly. I mean, you do see it a lot in America with they seem to be very outspoken from a law perspective in the sense of they're lawyers, but they're also activists.
So that's like the NAACP and things.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in civil rights, which is a lot of what the American system, those lawyers tend to be, then that is their job to effectively scrutinize corporations, the government, and things like that. It's not such a big area of law here. We do have human rights lawyers, and they will specialize in that. But just generally, I mean, even those human rights people, they will still have to be cautious as to what they say, just generally.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for that. That was just a trigger with the 5,000, 4,000 mark and stuff. And thank you for being so patient, Roxanne. Let's say hello to you.
Hi.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm great at the moment. I was a bit, like I said, flustered, a bit rushing around to get everything set up, plugging this and that in, and it's not coming through and working. But yeah, we're here now, so I'm pleased.
It's nice to see other people apart from just myself in my room working away. So,
have you been this lockdown kind of thing? Have you just been constantly working from home?
Yeah, working from home still. Yeah, so.
Oh, wow. You know what? I've been working from home with a few cases that I've been working on, but for the most part, I haven't. I've been out all the way through working. One of them kind of frontline worker people. So it's not been that different really, except for me having to, put my new face on when I go out. Anyway, let's get going on this topic, which has touched the hearts and minds emotionally of so many people, not just across the UK but across the world. Well, let me go over to you, Carl or Daniel, or to say, where do we start with this? Where does this conversation start for yourselves in relation to what's the first question that you'd want to put to Roxanne?
I think it's probably helpful, Roxanne, if you just maybe give us an initial overview.
Yeah. Okay. So following then in light of the George Floyd murder and also the COVID pandemic, there was a commission set up on race and ethnic disparities in order to assess sort of the position in the UK following those events that were happening in the US and also in light of COVID. Dr. Tony Sewell was appointed as the leader of this particular report, and he has faced some criticism in terms of these findings of the report. I think he's also faced some criticism because he has made some comments previously in the past which have been questioned. One of them being, I think, from around 2010, where he said that there was much of the supposed evidence of institutional racism was flimsy at the time. So I think there's a lot of sort of skepticism about his findings in this particular report as to whether he was the appropriate person to lead this or not. So there's a lot of opinion in terms of the report and the findings that it has, and in particular, the overall finding really that they made that the UK is not institutionally racist. So just sort of getting into that, it is heavily focused, the report itself, it's heavily focused upon statistics and data, and that is sort of the underlying theme running throughout it. The Commission in the report, they state that they are especially concerned with the way that the term institutional racism is actually being applied in current society, and in terms of the conversation that many of us are having following the events, especially of last year, on racial disparities. So the Commission itself states that we do need clear standard definitions of the term institutional racism, structural racism, or systemic racism. And I think they make the point where they say that the overuse of the term institutional racism or things being racist seems to dilute its meaning. So that is one of their findings early on in the report. Now, following the report being commissioned, there has been 24 recommendations which have been made, and they are largely grouped into 4 theme areas. And these are mainly focused on the topics of health, education, training and skills, justice and policing. Policing is obviously a big one. They do cover the aspects of change that the Commission believes will meaningfully address the disparities that we face in the UK and the inequalities for all those who are affected by that as well. So in terms of the 4 particular theme areas, they are to build trust, to promote fairness, to create agency, and to achieve inclusivity. So in terms of sort of building trust, I think they have separated them here as sort of 5 recommendations in that particular bracket. That does include challenging racist and discriminatory actions. Now, we'd hope that in the society that we live in today, and considering that actually it seems to be more of an open thing that people are talking about these particular topics and having those conversations with their peers and colleagues, that we are in a society where actually we are able to challenge racist behaviour, whether we see that, from our friends and family, or whether we actually see that in the workplace. So that was one of the recommendations, and I think they are also looking at, government powers in terms of being able to enforce certain actions against, institutions or individuals who are found to hold, discriminatory beliefs or subject someone to discrimination. Another recommendation is to sort of review, the inspection process of institutions, and including, the disparities in the lived experiences that some ethnic minority workers may face in their actual roles. Also improving the transparency and use of artificial intelligence. And what I mean by that is sometimes, for example, when you are making, maybe a mortgage application, or you're going for your car insurance, sometimes sort of that automated decision-making process disproportionately affects those who are from, a poorer sort of background, or from an ethnic minority, in terms of whether you're going to be granted that insurance or whether you're going to be granted that mortgage product. So, the Commission are suggesting, that there has to be some type of guidance and make it mandatory for companies to publish, how they actually come to these decisions as well. An area again is to sort of bridge the divide and create partnership with the police and the communities that they actually serve. Historically, and even to today, there is huge, I believe, sort of mistrust in the police from those communities, from ethnic minority communities especially. And we see that because lived experiences are different. And, there's no bigger case really that sort of puts that in the spotlight or into focus than, the George Floyd murder and the trial that has now concluded with Chauvin being found guilty. So that there is a historical mistrust of police, I think largely stemming from sort of the elder generation, but the younger generation of today as well, they have that lived experience as well. Also improve training to provide officers with the practical skills to interact with the communities that they serve. And a suggestion of the Commission is that they are held to de-escalation training, and also to improve on stop and search powers. I think the statistical data that they've assessed is that those, especially sort of Black Caribbean boys, are disproportionately represented in terms of stop and searches that are conducted upon them. And one of the areas for improvement is also that that officers are held to account if their body-worn video cameras are not on when they are doing those stops and search, which begs the question as to why that would ever be a situation in the first place.
Exactly.
But if a senior officer finds something concerning on that body-worn footage camera, then obviously they would take that forward with them. So, that is also a recommendation of the Commission, but one which, I thought, well, that should just be a given, that if you are stopping and searching, that your camera would be on at all times, that, there is accountability there if something was to happen.
I think just on the point there of stop and search, Roxanne, I mean, I think the shocking statistic for me is that it says that for Black people, you're 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched than white people are. And again, it says that Black people are also 18 times more likely than white people to actually be searched. I mean, I think that is just a staggering number, 18 times more likely to be searched.
Yeah.
And I think
sorry.
Well, it just comes back to this issue as to the communities in which people are being policed don't necessarily represent police officers from that background. I mean, there was an anecdote that somebody was saying to me a few years ago, which is, if you see, some police officers, when they did this test, that black youths who perhaps would be a bit more animated when stopped by police. They're not necessarily doing anything wrong. It's just their natural, the way they are engaging causes police officers to react in a more negative way, rather than how the anecdote is that for white, especially young white males, who still answer the questions but in a different way, are treated very differently. And I think that this is one of the historical issues that we've had.
Do you think that's a, see, my experience, yeah, because I work with young people, yeah, and I've seen how many young people from European backgrounds respond to the police, and they just tell the police where to go. Yeah? They don't. I remember going to a meeting when I used to work for this gang organization, and I went down to a meeting in Partington in Manchester, yeah, and there was some trouble there, and they were talking in the town hall. All different agencies were there about how did they deal with the issues that's taking place there. And then one of the police officers was describing an incident that took place where there was a police van that had gone into the area. It had actually picked up, got a young person, but then another group of young people came, started throwing things at the van, started shaking the van, and actually managed to get this young person away, and they were able to run off. And I was sat there open-mouthed, because I knew if that had took place not 2 minutes away from here, you would have had about 4 TAU vans there, probably armed officers. There's no way that it would have had that. So when you said there, it's about how they respond. I think there's, it goes back again to what Roxanne was saying about the different interpretations of how people take on that term of racism and fear. And I think it's Professor Kehinde Andrews that talks about it, and about it not being an individual. It's about, you have to check yourself as an individual, and the institutionalized, racism is about power. And the power in those situations doesn't lie with the young person, or the black person that is being stopped. But like you said, there's a learned behavior on both sides.
Yeah, I think that and again, this is some of the anecdotal evidence, is that if the times in which, say, for example, you have a white officer engaging with a black person, is it only usually when they're stopping and searching them? It kind of ingrains that mentality that people who I stop who are black are aggressive. Whereas if you don't generally socialize in those communities, and you're not as familiar with all the wonderful diversity and everything that goes with it, then you naturally start from a position of, well, there's going to be an issue straight away. So it already becomes escalated. And I think, whereas, there was somebody on the radio the other day talking about Dylan Roof, who was the guy who killed, various black people with a machine gun in the church. He was actually walking down the road with the gun, having just murdered people, and effectively was taken, I think, possibly to Burger King ultimately for something to eat on the way to the station.
I heard that.
And you compare it with the treatment of, people who are just actually minding their own business, usually driving a car, unfortunately, for the crime that is.
Sorry, just to jump in, I don't know if you saw the most recent video of, I think it was a soldier on back home after active duty. He was still in his uniform, and he was it pepper sprayed for no good reason. So yeah, I think if you compare and contrast those two examples, it's quite telling.
And I think that's the problem, isn't it? Because if we've got to be careful here not to tar everybody with the same brush. But I think for those who do react in the way they do negatively, is it a case of they just assume it's going to be a hostile situation because they don't really know how to engage with the community properly? And so if their mindset is already of the view that, well, I'm bracing myself for some trouble, rather than, oh, I know this guy, or I know the community, I understand, if I just speak to them normally, this can diffuse a situation. And I think and all that happens is it gets your back up, and then their backs up. And before you know it, the whole thing's escalated, as you say, Anthony, and the TAU are being called.
Even when you talk like that, about, going and talking to another community, and how do you talk to somebody, and that's going through the mind of somebody who's a police officer. It is a conversation more like you're talking about, you're going to meet aliens, and not like you're going to talk to another human being. And I think for the most part, when we're talking, and I maybe tell me what you're wrong, you lawyers, or I know you speak your minds, it's getting down really to that point that goes right back to the 3/5 of a human being.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that, obviously that was historically how Black people at one time were viewed. It is structural. I think obviously it's probably not, well, it certainly isn't anywhere as bad as it is in the US, but I think it just comes down to the simple notion of if you don't engage in that community in which you're policing, and the only time you're rolling through there is probably in a police car, then your experience of that community, whichever it may be, will naturally be clouded by the only interactions you have with it.
Okay, so I'm going to be right back. I'm going to do advert. See you.
Feel the vibe on Legacy.
Greetings.
Yeah, it'd be good when we come back to the state about that community, and then we'll go back to the report about how you interact with that community, because it's a big thing. A lot of people are saying things like police should live in the communities that they work. I don't know if that was something that was in the report, or it's something that's just been thrown out there. But
I think just on that point, Anthony, I think actually, don't quote me on this, but I think police policy is you don't police the area in which you work.
Yeah.
And I think that fosters that problem.
That is right. I think you don't. I don't know whether that's in terms of like a safety aspect for the officer themselves, that they're not actually policing the area in which they live, obviously because of the ramifications for themselves personally. From any individuals who they may come across, who they are arresting or who they are detaining. But one of the recommendations of the report, certainly in the theme area of inclusivity, is to introduce a local residency requirement so that police officers are from the area that they are actually policing. And I think the intention of that is to gain a better understanding of the communities in which they actually serve.
How do you think that would work? What issues or problems or good things would come from that? Could come from that?
Yeah, I think I can see it from both sides. I can see in terms of the safety aspect why they would have the policy at the moment, that you don't police the area that you serve in. But then on the flip side of that, I can see the benefit to having officers from who've grown up in the same community or are aware of the same social issues that some of the community are actually facing. And I think it would help in terms of maybe the police force having more empathy for the individuals within the community, and possibly going towards bridging the gap between the community and the police.
Okay, we're going to come back.
Feel the vibe.
Legacy 90.1.
Yes, welcome back. You're in tune to the search engine. This is the Law at the Court show, and I'm here, co-hosts Kyle and Daniel, and our guest this evening, Roxanne Buckley. And we've been talking about the disparity, the Commission on Race and Ethnicity disparity report, also known as the SEUK report. And Roxanne has been taking us through some of the recommendations of this report, of which there are, I think, about 25, is it?
24.
24. So we've been discussing that. At the moment, we've been talking about the area of policing and some of the possible issues of what could make it worse or what could make it better. And we're just talking about police living in the areas which they police and what some of the issues that could rise from that and what possibly some of the benefits are as well. Sorry, can you carry on, Roxanne?
Yeah, so I think we were just saying then within the break that, you know, one of the recommendations of the report itself under the theme of inclusivity is that the police are thinking of introducing a policy that the individual officer has to be a local resident of the community in which they actually serve. And I think I personally can see sort of obviously the benefits and the drawbacks to both sides of that potential policy. One being, you know, that I think the current way that recruitment is set up is that you don't actually police the area in which you serve. And I think that's mainly for a safety thing for the individual officer in terms of the individuals that they may be coming across in their service who they are eventually detaining or having those run-ins with. So I can completely see it from sort of a safety aspect in terms of the individual officer. But then again, in terms of the report itself and what it aims to achieve, in terms of addressing the, you know, disparity and the inequalities that are faced by ethnic minority communities, I can also see the benefit of a police officer coming from the same community in which they are going to serve, and the empathy as well of that officer with the individuals of those communities as well. So I think it may go some way towards bridging the gap between the police and the community. Whether it will completely bridge the gap is something to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of giving balance, there is a really good organisation called the National Black Police Association, NBPA. I think it'd be probably helpful if we could try and get somebody on. I've attended one of their events previously, and they are really good. I think, Dan, you was there as well a couple of years ago now. So, you know, there are obviously black police officers out there. I think the issue is just in terms of the wider community and how to address these things. And to be honest, I don't think they're issues that nobody's aware of. It's just a case of, you know, keep educating people, the community, the officers. And so I think if we can get somebody on, then that would be really good.
Yeah, this is, but isn't this like, again, you know, because we can go back, just like this disparity report, yeah? This is just another report, okay?
Well, I think that this report, just to interject quick, Anthony, is that this report supposedly was more important because it was commissioned by the government. And the idea is that there were various points of which they were to be actually brought in as regulations, so to speak. I think the main one was the BAME reference.
But was it, but just on that report, I mean, you've got this report, the recommendation. You had the one that Theresa May.
David Lammy was probably the most forthright.
Then you had going right back, you had the Macpherson report. So I'm just saying, in relation to how much, it seems like it comes down to not more than just writing regulations and recommendations, and there has to be some personal, something about you that makes you want to understand why you feel like this about this particular community, or why these things are happening in that community. It's not. It can't be just about constant regulation. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I suppose that. Sorry,
So I was just going to say, I think that was one of the criticisms of this report, actually. Just the fact that, you know, there's been so many, and I think a majority of the recommendations in the Lammy report are yet to be implemented. And it almost seems like, you know, the research has been done, the studies have been taken out. Now it's time for some action for the government, rather than commissioning somebody who, it could be said, if you're being uncharitable, is of the same political persuasion as the government, and commissioning that person to do yet another report. And, you know, we'll see where we get to with the recommendations in terms of how they're implemented. But I take your other point as well. I mean, it's not clear to me how effective implementing many of these recommendations are. It'd be interesting to see if there was any way you could measure the effects that the implementation of, you know, stopping using the word BAME, like what would the practical effect on equality, diversity, and inclusion of that recommendation be? I think, as you say, it is a much deeper problem, and, you know, something that maybe can't be addressed solely by government implementing recommendations from reports.
You mentioned the Black Police Association. I mean, I've had on this show on quite a few occasions. In fact, probably in a couple of months ago, he's retired now, but Charles Critchlow, who was the president of the Black Police Association, you know, so he made it through his 30 years in the police, but you know, and not very favourable things to say. In fact, I think there was one stage where he had to take the police to tribunal himself. I've also had Paul Bailey, who was also the chair of Black Police Association, who again, he had to take the police to tribunal because of their treatment of him. But yet, you know, they were still very much about saying and supportive of Black people joining the police, and they were vocal in the sense of talking about the things that they believe from their experiences could develop and make better relationships within the Black community and other communities as well. And I go back again to say it has to be a bit more than just following what's on paper. And
yeah,
it takes, and I think it's probably the same in every profession. It's your content of your character that stands you out from other people. I'm sure there's lawyers that you can't stand that you have to be working with because they're stuck up or whatever, because they're on the 100 grand earning for a case, and so therefore, you know, I'm just for that's dad, you know, I'm just throwing that out there, but it's in every area.
Yeah, I think that probably the biggest change I think that came was, you know, unfortunately off the back of the death of George Floyd. I think that had global significance, more than any report probably ever will have. I think there was just a groundswell of people were just so horrified and disgusted by that murder that it made people that ordinarily are probably a bit oblivious to issues that we're facing could see it on video, exactly the treatment that some people face and discrimination. And I think it did give a lot of people across, you know, corporates, individuals, governments, pause for thought to think, actually, things aren't as great as what we think, and society isn't as equal as it's made out to be. That brought it home into people's living rooms. And I think that probably, hopefully there isn't another moment like that, but I suspect there will be more in the future to come, sadly. Like with Stephen Lawrence, I think that again was another watershed moment in race relations, where the country changed, you know, for the better, actually. It's very painful, you know, just thinking about what he went through and, you know, countless others have gone through, really hurts. But at the end of it, you think, well, have we come out better And I think that if you look back 20, 30 years, I think we could probably say we have. It is difficult, but I think as a community, we are very resilient. We've had to be. There was no other way for a long time. My dad recalls stories of teddy boys chasing him. It was pretty tough, but thankfully we've moved on. And I think even just probably in the last year, 2 years, I think things have improved. Doesn't always feel like it at the time. And it's not to say people have got their own challenges and battles, but I think that generally speaking, if you look back, things are improving. There's always work to be done, and you will always have people, especially people in power, that do hold certain prejudices, that hold us back. And, as you say with Charles, he had to take them to tribunal. But you can almost guarantee that will have, again, even just like one iota of moving the needle forwards. You've just got to keep pushing at it rather than giving up and thinking, oh, it's hopeless. Here's another report. But you've just got to think, well, every time, something might come good of it.
Well, the thing that seems to be pushing that people are getting like upset about, especially around in America, and along with this Black Lives Matter that was going on, is the call for defunding of the police, are also calls for liability, which I suppose the sentences of Chauvin over there shows that. But I think we're still in the place here where I don't think we've had, considering the deaths in custody, we haven't had a lot of police officers over here that's been held accountable for what they've done. But in the sense of the defunding the police, again, that is something that I don't know if that comes into the report at all.
I don't think I saw about defunding the police, but I think just in terms of sort of people's views on the report and the homing in of the finding of the report that actually institutional racism doesn't exist in the UK. I can understand why people are upset at that finding. It's sort of in a way to be considered separately from some of the recommendations out of the 24 recommendations that are made. Some of them are good, and I think that we can take some comfort in the way that the government is proposing to deal with some of the inequalities. Now, whether that actually comes to fruition or not is yet to be seen, but some of the recommendations certainly I think I can see, for example, in terms of sort of education and access to opportunities and things like that, with banks getting on board to assist and fund schemes for young business-minded individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds and helping them in respect of that. I think that can only be a good thing. But in terms of sort of the finding that institutional racism doesn't exist in the UK, it's whether was the statistical data enough in the report to actually come to that conclusion. It seems, I think, on the one hand, sometimes a little bit sort of separated from the commentary which is in the report. And I think at the time, the Macpherson report in 1999, after following the murder of Stephen Lawrence, where we were forced to acknowledge that institutional racism does exist. And certainly with the events in America with George Floyd, we've seen the crumbling of that blue wall of silence over there. Now, whether that happens in the UK, I think people are more alive to the issues which we are facing at this moment in time, and people are more willing to challenge it. So, I think that's why a lot of people are upset, especially in light of certain things that have happened not so long ago. The Windrush scandal, the Grenfell Tower incident. These are incidents that have happened in more recent times. And then for the report to say, well, actually, we don't actually find that there was any institutional racism in the UK, I can understand why people are upset by that particular finding. But also on the other hand, the Commission, they also state that, it's about building on and advancing progress of the last 50 years. Yes, there has been some progress, but they term it in terms of, well, we don't find overt racism, but, there's also covert racism, especially, in everyday lives, in the workplace, for example. You're never going to unless someone's, really crazy, to outrightly, be racist to someone. Those types of discrimination, or discrimination on the whole, it isn't usually overt these days. It is covert. And I think it's, about building those facilities that were able to flush those things out.
Yeah. And that's just, sorry, go on, Anthony.
I was going to say, and does the report in any way give recommendations of how that should be or could be done? I mean, like, because even in the police, you've got the Black Police Association. Now, are they utilizing them in the right way, do you think? But saying that, they also have the Police Christian Association, you've got the Police Senior Officers Association, you've got so many. So they're recognizing within having these groups that there is a need for some kind of support, safe space. But
yeah, I mean, and one of the recommendations is that, we equip the police service to serve the better needs, and obviously to sort of train them better in terms of de-escalation techniques as well. So, it sort of touches on it, but I don't think it goes into real deep analysis as to how, these objectives can actually be achieved fully. It is just mainly based on data and statistics, and saying, well, we need to be able to train the police to be able to, better handle situations, and also to be more representative of the communities.
Okay, Daniel, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one thing that really annoyed people about the report might be the tone of it. It just came across as maybe a bit smug, and it was the British state patting itself on the back, which maybe takes away from or undermines one of the points they were trying to make, which I think is probably a fair point, which is that, there has been a lot of progress made, and whilst we've still got a long way to go, and whilst we shouldn't, be complacent in any way, this, relatively speaking, it's a good country to live in, I think, certainly for most people. I think that's a point that could have been better made, maybe without having to say, Britain is perfect and blameless. But I think it's a fair point to make that, I know certainly as a black man, if I look at any country in Europe, I can't think of many that I'd rather live in as a black man. I think whole Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, I think I'd probably have more problems than I do in this country. And I think that's something that's worth remembering in this conversation.
Yeah, again, just a personal anecdote. Just echoing what you're saying, Dan, but we were planning a trip possibly to drive across the US. And I'm thinking, is that a good idea? You wouldn't think twice to hop in the car in the UK, drive from Land's End to John O'Groats, no issue. So, yeah, I think that was probably what...
But some people would have an issue with that in this still in the UK. There's some areas in the UK where some black people probably think, I don't want to go there. Although, especially if you're going back to like when you were talking about your father's time, and not even so long.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, there are exceptions to everything, but I think on the whole, there are not many cities or towns in the UK that you wouldn't feel reasonably safe going through. Certainly not to the extent, I just simply didn't end up booking the trip because it was that, and that was the sole reason, is it just felt risky. And somebody said, every day you get back to your hotel, would you be thinking, thank God for that, we've made it through another trip. And that's...
But Carl, is that also another thing that we've taken on mentally and emotionally, the same way that we're saying about the police have got all these prejudices within their mind about these communities, these fears, false education accepted as reality or whatever. Yeah.
Well, but the problem is, Anthony, I see things on TV which I certainly don't want to put myself in that situation. Even if that was a 1 in 10,000 chance being stopped. I mean, bearing in mind, driving on the wrong side of the road anyway is probably a bit ropey for us. Yeah, I'm sure chances are nothing would have ever happened, but coming face to face with an officer with a gun and seeing what we see on the TV is a pretty terrifying prospect. Not to say, sorry, Dan, go on.
Sorry, very quickly, just to add to that, and I think this illustrates the point quite well. There's definitely a problem with racism in English football. You know, we've seen, I think it was Raheem Sterling who was racially abused last season at, I think it might have been a Chelsea game. You know, you do see it far too often. You see it on social media a lot now. So there's a problem with racism in English football that needs to be addressed head on. You know, the FA and the powers that be need to take much firmer action. All that being said, it seems that every time, you know, England go to Serbia or wherever, or you saw it with Arsenal a few weeks ago when it was Rangers, where their player was racially abused by another footballer who played for Sparta Prague, and then the Secretary of Sport for that country came out and said the Sparta Prague player did nothing wrong. So it just seems to be on a different level in certain countries, and you do feel fortunate to be a football fan in England every time you switch on, I don't know, CSK Moscow, and you see all sorts of crazy flags, and you know the openness of it. I think in this country it's very the racism in Britain is very British. It's very covert. It's very polite. It's very understated, which is not good, but is preferable to violent, overt, naked racism, which still exists in alarming numbers in many civilized Western countries, including America, unfortunately.
You're right. But I remember a quote from Malcolm X, when he was talking about the North of America and the South America, and he was saying he would prefer. I was talking about South Africa, compared to the UK. You know, he says South Africa is a racist society, and they practice racism openly. They show themselves, whereas in America and probably in the UK, it's subtle, so you don't know where you stand at, and he'd prefer to know where he stood with people rather than be sucked into.
Yeah, but you see, the issue there, though, Anthony, is that he's talking about wanting to live in a culture, reluctantly, I say wanting to, but where it's actively encouraged to be prejudicial. Whereas here, at least, whilst people in their own homes may have those, pretty poor views of others, what you can be almost certain of is that if it was to be aired publicly, they would just be absolutely vilified by the majority. Now, it's not to say that, many of that majority in private don't hold those views, but it's certainly not tolerated to an extent that, you could say it without any issue. You can be arrested for saying it here. You can almost certainly lose your job. The stigma of being labelled a racist in the UK is a pretty strong one. Whereas, go to a more overtly racist country and they might actually be, applauded. As it was here 40 years ago with Bernard Manning and those crazy jokes that would come out, people in stitches at. Yeah, okay, you know where you stood with people like that, but actually, would you rather be there than where we are now?
I think Malcolm X can say he'd rather know where he stands from the position of a black man who surrounds himself by black men, who's rooted in a black community. If you're a black person who lives on a white estate in, I don't know, Wythenshawe in Manchester, Garston in Liverpool, and you're surrounded by hostility, I think you'd prefer to not know where you stand, if you know what I mean, when you leave the house and you can't walk down the street without a gang of lads at the bottom of the road saying something to you. So I think I understand what you're saying, Malcolm X. I think like insidious racism is probably harder to stamp out in some ways because nobody wants to cop to it. But I think if we're talking about lived experiences and, you know, how somebody else's behavior towards you can affect your experience, I think there's something to be said for the more the British strain of this virus.
And on that note, we'll be right back.
Feel the vibe on Legacy.
We want to end.
Anthony,
Yeah,
have you had any questions come in?
got a question. Got a couple questions here, which is like about on America, and one to what you said earlier, and I'll read them when we come back. Yeah, that's interesting term, that Daniel, this British virus.
British trade.
But staying on a medical kind of like term there. When you look at racism, don't you think it comes on a bit of mental health?
I think it's minority often.
Because it does really come down to, in a way, that you're looking at somebody, yeah, who essentially, totally is the same as you except for skin tone. But that person is seeing something different.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a lot of it is sometimes fear as well. Fear of the unknown, fear of not wanting to lose what they've got. It's irrational, absolutely. I think clearly it is a mental thing, because if you look at children, they don't have those prejudices, it's learned.
Exactly.
But then once they develop it, it's hard to break that cycle once it's ingrained.
I think, as you say, it is an emotional thing, and that's why I'm always a bit, I think after the Black Lives, after George Floyd's death, I think something that was quite popular, and it's something I did myself, was, you know, posting like anti-racist resources, like educational resources. But when I reflected on that, I just feel like, because it's not a rational thing, how can you rationalize somebody out of it? I think you've got to it's got to be an emotional thing. But since it's an emotional thing, I think the best way to conquer it is with emotion. So, you know, a formerly racist person working next to a Black or Asian guy, forming a friendship with him and realizing that, oh my God, like, just like me. I think that's how you conquer it, as opposed to, you know, textbooks.
Someone did that in America, didn't they? They sat down, they made friends with someone, was it from the Ku Klux Klan? And I think
I actually had him on the show. I had him on the show about I'm getting on about 2-3 years ago. I can't remember his name. He's also a musician. But yeah, he went and met with the Ku Klux Klan. He got a lot of stick for it. But the person who he spoke to, who's quite high in the Ku Klux Klan, he was able to, you know, get in. But a lot of people are like, why should you be making that move, you know?
I think it happens more naturally. I think it's quite interesting that the most diverse cities tend to contain the least racist white people.
Legacy 90.1.
Welcome back. You're on Tune to the Search Engine. This is the Law at the Core show, and we've got our co-hosts Kyle Blackburn, Daniel Adejumo, and our guest Roxanne Buckley. And we're talking about the disparity report. We did have some other topics, but we're getting into some meaty areas here. Got a couple of texts that I'm going to read out in a minute. Daniel, just want to finish what you were saying there?
Yeah, I just think one of the things these reports often recommend is, you know, anti-racist education in various guises, and I think that certainly has its place. But I think one thing we were saying at the break is there's nothing really rational about racism. It's certainly something that is felt on an emotional level and something that is taught at an emotional level, sometimes because of fear, sometimes because of hatred, sometimes because of anger, sometimes because it's a proxy for other negativity in that individual's life. And so since it's an emotional thing, I think that the best way to rid someone of the virus, for want of a better phrase, is not necessarily educational resources, not necessarily rational arguments, but to connect with them on an emotional level. And I think something that's always struck me is that, you know, if racism was rational, if there was a rational basis for racism, then you would expect white people who live in really diverse areas of the country to be the most racist. If mixing with people of different races, there was a rational basis for that fear, that distrust, that hatred, then you'd expect white people who live in Moss Side, for example, or Southeast London to be the most racist people. But you tend to find that a lot of racist people often tend to be white people who live in areas where there are no Black, Asian, whatever, you know, white people who live in very white areas who don't know any Black people. And that suggests to me that one of the most effective ways to tackle racism is for just more, you know, more discussion, more engagement between races. And I think that would break down the barriers, because people will realise that, you know, as you say, the only difference really is skin tone.
So I think you're getting into a bit of classism there, isn't it? You know,
I don't think. I think class probably plays a part. I think you can have, I don't know, somebody from Chelsea or Kensington who maybe doesn't know any Black people growing up and then goes to a university in wherever, and half of the people on his course or in her block are from different ethnicities. And I guarantee you that rich white person will come out of university more tolerant and liberal than they went in. And I think exactly the same applies for, you know, a poor white person.
Them liberals are very dangerous.
Well,
let me ask you the question. When's the last time for you, I mean, if you want to share it, that you felt that something had happened to you from a racist perspective or prejudicial perspective?
It's a good question. So for me, I'll be very candid about my experience. So I actually grew up in a very rough white working class area of Liverpool. I've lost the accent now, but thankfully. But until the age of 8, I lived in an area called Egberth in Liverpool, which you know, it's not okay. Very rough is an exaggeration, but it's not an area that you would necessarily, you know, be rushing to move into, and it's probably 90-95% white. So there's a lot of racism there. I was probably too young to remember most of it, but there are still, you know, things I remember now that I experienced when I was 8 years old or younger. And my parents, you know, they had a very difficult time of it. They moved to that area in the late 80s. So, you know, you can only imagine what it was like for them. I then moved to Southport, which is another predominantly white area, which is probably less socio-economically deprived than the area I used to live in, but still, with it being predominantly white, being one of very few Black people, racism, albeit more casual racism as opposed to hostile racism, was a very, very, you know, daily occurrence from every angle, really. Since having moved to Manchester, I can probably count the amount of times I've experienced racism on one hand. So it's sort of turned on a dime in the last 5 years. But I do think that sort of also illustrates the point I'm making. My experience is that white people, rich, poor, or in between, who live in diverse areas, tend to be more tolerant.
Okay. So just recent then. So that's when growing up. But what about recently? Past year, 2 years?
On the top of my head, I generally can't remember the last time I felt like I'd been discriminated against in a racial sense.
Okay.
I generally can't remember.
Roxanne?
I don't think if I can pinpoint a time. I think casual racism is here till the current day. I've had things where I think one that used to bother me was everyone just assuming because I'm of mixed sort of heritage, mixed race, they'd be like, oh right, so your dad's black and your mum's white then. And I'd be like, no, actually my mum's black and my dad's white. It's the other way around. And then when you say it's like, oh, you're the wrong way round. You're the other way around. So yeah, and I think sometimes the experiences of mixed people can be like that. I think sometimes you do get sometimes a funny look where you say, well, actually, no, it's actually my mum who is black and my dad who's white. So I do still sometimes get funny looks now, when I say that. But I think in terms of sort of pinpointing another time would be, I think when I was at university and I'd gone to a law talk somewhere at the Ministry of Justice, actually. And I was speaking to someone from, I think, maybe one of the Inns of Court, etc. But it sort of said, where are you from, kind of thing. And when I'd said, Manchester, they seemed to be really dismissive, and then they just they literally cut the conversation short and went off and spoke to somebody else. And I remember actually speaking to a judge who was there at the time. He was really lovely, and he sort of said to me, he was like, well, Roxanne's like, you are, a woman from an ethnic minority, and actually you're from, an area which would be seen as more disadvantaged. So you're going to have to work twice as hard. And I think that's sometimes the rhetoric, especially when you're trying to get into like a professional career, that because you're from, an ethnic minority background, and added on that being a female at the time, well, still, but they were just like, yeah, well, you just get, you're not on sort of like that level playing field with your peers. You're going to have to really prove yourself just to show that you're as good as, someone else who's going for the same type of job. So I think that does still exist today. But I do think that in terms of sort of addressing, overt racism, I do think that obviously the rise in social media and social media platforms means that, it is coming to the forefront and people are being held accountable for some of their actions today that they wouldn't necessarily have been, a time ago. And obviously, I think as, things change, times change. I think things that would have been said generations ago are not accepted now. I think, the way that we actually deal with things also has to move in line with that.
Thank you for that. Carl, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I think for me it's probably similar in a sense. I actually feel quite fortunate in that I haven't had anything that's particularly overt. I think the closest it ever came for me was a couple of years ago. I was on a quiz with other solicitors, and I saw one of the questions. It was variety, and one of them was name Eminem's most recent number one or something. And all going through, I thought, I can see this is coming. And you could set your clock to it, and sure enough, one guy said, Kyle, come on, what's Eminem's last number one?
You must know.
I couldn't honestly tell you. And I stopped short of saying, why are you asking me anyway? It's clearly there, an assumption. And it comes back to that point, more so a case of unconscious bias. Well, consciously, I suppose, he just assumed that I would be into rap music and know that. Didn't ask me any other question about ABBA and, various other hits and things. So, yeah, I think that's probably as close as I've come to it.
Yeah, I won't even start because I've just got so many. It's happened to me from ever since I can remember. And given my most latest experience of it was on Monday.
So go on.
Well, I was coming out of my road where I live. There's some construction going on. There was a big, massive articulated lorry down the side of the road. I was coming up the other road, and this guy stood in the road, stops me in the road to let this articulated lorry come through, which is fine. This articulated lorry was massive to my little car. So I just said, just let me go past. Take me a second to go past. So he just was like that. So this lorry hadn't even started moving yet. So he was stood at that side. So I just went to drive round to just quickly get past. He jumped in front of my car. So, I got a bit hot under the collar. I was just get out of the way. All this time that he's jumping in front of my car, I could have gone and that. So he jumped in front of my car, put his hand on my car. I revved my engine, and then he kind of stepped to the side and walked away. And then as he was coming round the side of the car, and as I was driving past, he looks in the car and goes, "You black bastard." So I was like, "Oh gosh." So I went and parked up my car, and I got out of the car, and I was saying to him, like, "What's your problem? Why did you say that? You tried to run me over." And I just said to him, "Well, why did you call me that name?" And he was like, "Well, I wanted to do that." I said, "It hadn't even moved yet." I said, "I could have just got past in a minute, but why did you call me that name?" So you're a man, I'm a man. Why did you say that? He just went a few colours, bit of a, traffic lights and that, and just tried to walk away. And I followed him and tried to, I took a picture and whatever. But yeah, just, it could have just been a second. But then when he did that, I kind of felt, is that why you stopped me in the first place?
And I think it's a valid question to ask. I mean, often we do.
In that position of power, again. But I've had it, I remember quickly one that I had when I worked in a children's home. It was the National Children's Home at the time. I was in a team meeting. It was a company that I worked for, about 60 staff. I was the only black member of staff there. I'm in this team meeting. They brought the tea in for the break. I've gone to drink my tea, and people have started laughing. So I'm like, "What are you laughing at?" When I looked at my cup, they'd given me a cup with a monkey on the side of it. And we're all laughing. Anyway, let's get on some more good stuff. I've got a couple of texts here, so let's go with that. Okay, it says, "Great show, guys. Such an important topic. I am a black woman, and I would have to think twice before driving from Land's End to John O'Groats. The only saving grace would be less police carry guns here in the UK." And that's from Naomi.
Yeah, I mean, I think just, on the point that was being made is that, I think judging by other countries, certainly Western countries, surely Britain has to be one of the most tolerant in that respect. Who's to say what would happen? You don't know, but I think statistically, you're probably going to make your journey. And I think that there are certainly, our society is far more diverse than it is on the continent generally. We do have quite strong laws in terms of, what you can do if you do feel you've been wrongly treated. And I think just by virtue of the fact that, as the listener said, UK police don't generally carry firearms on them. So
and it's a difficult point to make, because it's almost like telling someone who's just been kicked in the knee that at least you've not got a broken ankle. Still been kicked in the knee, it still hurts, it's still not right. But I think if we're speaking relatively, and only if we are speaking relatively, it is worth acknowledging that once upon a time we had a broken ankle, and now we've got a really sore knee. And there are plenty of black people all over the Western world who still have broken ankles. And I've taken this analogy too far now, but the point I'm making is that I think it could be worse, but it needs to be better. I think that's how I
Well, what 273 here says, tuned into the search engine, the best station in the world. My view is we all have the same blood. Let's agree. Another one here says, don't you all think it's because of the profession you are in, you see the UK as having moved on, or is it generational?
No, it's probably
Stephen Lawrence was murdered decades ago.
I think the generational thing definitely is one of them, definitely. And it's just a case of we haven't experienced, the levels that, even just 20 years ago. The reality is I was, a young boy, shall we say, 20 years ago. Isn't that a great thing? I do feel for those like, my dad's generation that did experience, really tough times. But, I think as well, we can't live constantly in the past. I think you have to move forward. And if we constantly carry the baggage of what happened and the injustices that happened to us a generation or two ago, then yeah, we'll be forever in this loop and cycle of just.
But the thing is, it's about who's carrying it, isn't it? Because is it that black people are carrying it? Because it's or is it being put on them? Is the other people carrying it, but then the problem being put on black people, because it's not. I mean, historically, yeah, we black people, if you look at it on a world level, they don't have a history of being horrible necessarily to white people. It is the other way around. So when you say carrying that, is that another like when they say chip on the shoulder or race card? Is that not similar?
Yeah, well, I mean that's the allegation that's often levelled at people that are claiming injustices. Oh, well, you've got a chip on your shoulder. But I think that more often than not, you can actually show a pattern of behaviour to say, well, it's not a chip, it's not an isolated incident. But I think that if you just park that, I think a lot of it is a mindset. I think, for example, the anecdote I gave was not the most serious. I could have really dwelled on that, and it would have, of course, been my right to do that. But I kind of saw almost a bit of pity and a bit of humour in the situation. I think a lot of it does come down to ourselves and how we view the situation. It's not to say that us being wronged is any way diminished if we take a more optimistic view. But I just think, well, the opposite is if we take a really negative view, then you will naturally, and it comes back to what I was saying about police officers, if you start out with a view that things are just terrible and the world is rigged against you, then I think you will more often than not look at it through that lens. Whereas if you can try and be a bit optimistic, of course, we've all been there, we've all had things said and we've witnessed it. That's not to say we're naive and thinking, the world's all great. But I think what we're saying is that certainly probably speaking for my generation, not that I'm really qualified to do that, but I don't think we experience anywhere near what previous generations have had. And I think that can only be a good thing. And I think as Dan was saying, nobody for 1 second is saying the problem's solved. It's just the challenges we have now are very different to what they were 20 years ago. The fact is, 3 of us here are qualified solicitors. Yeah,
well, if you go back, say 30 odd years ago, we actually had more black people in positions of power. We had more black people in Parliament, in quite high positions, and obviously in other areas. I mean, we had so many academics that came over here from the Caribbean with high caliber education. Now you're looking at, I think we've got about 2 historians in this country. Hakeem Adi and David Olusoga.
Yeah, they're obviously the very public faces that the masses are aware of. As I say, Anthony,
it's about. I'm just saying, where do we see the progress? I mean, because we always say there's people who sometimes get rolled out to speak, to say, look at me, I'm doing okay. I've made it. Therefore, again,
Well,
going back to the same things, you're not progressing because you've got that chip, or you're not progressing because you're playing that race card, or you're not able or to stand in pride in who you are and what you represent, how some people feel.
I absolutely agree with that, but I think that just to try and be objective, if you do look at the statistics, whether that's employment, healthcare, education, things have gotten better. Might not feel it on the day-to-day level, but I think if you stand back and look at it, as I say, I'm not trying to.
I totally agree with you, Carl. I do think things have got better, and I think things have got better because of, like you were saying about your parents, about our parents and the father. They came over here. They were purposeful. They knew that they were not necessarily going to benefit from their struggle, but they were willing to put in that struggle so you could benefit, or I could benefit. Yeah, but also a lot of what they did in the sense of creating communities, creating Saturday supplementary schools because of what wasn't taking place, setting up their own churches because of not being welcome in other places, community centres and places like that. In a lot of ways, some of that is being taken away. Now that might be seen as development, being more multicultural, in the sense of more mixing. So people are saying, well, why do you need a West Indian centre? Why shouldn't it be a centre for everybody?
Yeah.
But then you'll also see in other areas that you will have a Muslim heritage centre or a Irish heritage centre. So then you ask them, why shouldn't we have a African heritage centre?
Yeah, and I think it's because the issue of race is so emotive.
Let me get these here. Got one here that says, "Wow, that's bad about your cup." Yeah,
that is bad about your cup. It's terrible.
That was 31 years ago. Yeah, I was 21 at the time, and I was working in an area in Cheshire called Congleton, and believe me, when I walked through the town, people would come out of the shops to have a look. That's how bad it was. I'd go out for a drink with my work colleagues, and I actually got refused to be served in one of the pubs as well. It was crazy.
I guess, sorry, just before you make that point, I guess the point that we're trying to make is that if you go to certain places today, 2021, April, in Europe, your experience in Congleton all those years ago probably wouldn't be that surprising in certain places in Europe today. And I'm sure that still happens in this country in pockets, but there are very few areas of the country, and there are some areas, but there are very few areas of the country that I would be worried that if I walk down the road, I'm going to get racially abused. I mean, I might get racially abused in Manchester, but I wouldn't be worried about it. Whereas if I was to go in certain places, it would be at not the back of my mind, the front of my mind.
I mean, I was, again, a quick anecdote. I was in Cancun a few years ago, spring break, and I walked up, so we're on the beach, and as you go up into the hotel from the beach, it's full of Americans, and I distinctly remember people's heads were turning as if to say, are you in this hotel? And that was, again, you just think, gosh, that's a different world, you might see the odd eye, like look at the corner of your heads were turning, as if almost like mouths agog, as though, no, you're not selling something in the hotel, beach ball or something. You just wouldn't see that in the UK, I don't think. It is a far more tolerant society, and as I say, it's not perfect. But
what does that mean? That word, tolerant. What does that mean?
And I think this is the key point. Tolerant, being tolerant in and of itself.
Black's Law Dictionary. What does tolerant mean?
For me, like, it's something my dad always used to say, that like being tolerant doesn't mean that you're, you know, for equality or for diversity. It doesn't mean that you're, in the modern language, I guess, we say an ally. It just means, you know, you keep your bad opinions to yourself. If you tolerate a bad smell, like, it doesn't mean you like the smell. If you tolerate, like, I don't know, like, being tolerant doesn't mean that, you know, Britain is some paradise of, like, liberalism and equality, diversity, and inclusion. It just means you can walk down the street 9 times out of 10 without being racially abused or having someone gawping at you because you're in a nice hotel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the texts, I'll get round to a couple of those ones that I've got left when we come back. I'm just going to a break. We'll be right back.
Feel the vibe on Legacy. Legacy.
Greetings. This is a message to.
Wow, yeah, tolerance. It is a thingy kind of word there. But and you know what you said before, Kyle, in the sense of when you went to was it in America and stuff? I think Mexico. Yeah, that sometimes that subtleness of even thinking that something's happened. You know, you're saying, did that? I
was shocked, seriously. You know, and these people are not just admiring me. These are people looking, saying, "What you're in here," and for me, that was eye-opening. I thought, "Wow, is that a snippet of life in America?" Because, you know, let's face it, the people that were there, they were probably quite middle-class American teenagers, but they were looking as if to say, you don't belong here. And I don't feel I have a chip on my shoulder. I feel quite confident walking in most places. But that one time I thought, something's not right here. They're looking at me because they're not used to it. I think that was the issue. And don't you find people like possibly yourself, Roxanne, saying that you're not like others because, you know, you are of dual heritage, therefore you might understand certain things a bit from a white perspective a bit more better, or they're maybe willing to have certain conversations with you that they may not have with Daniel.
I have had certain comments like that said before. I think when I was on the flip side of it, I think when I was in school and a girl for some reason decided to do a quota count of, you know, how many full white students there were in the classroom, and sort of another girl chipped in and was like, well, Roxanne's mixed, and she was like, yeah, but she's only half white. You know, she's still white. And it was a bit like, no, okay, half a person, but you know, yeah. And I think overall, though, I think I've been raised by my Jamaican grandparents, so I have that influence of like that Caribbean culture as well, and I possibly identify more with, you know, that side of my family than the other side of my family. But yeah, I have had comments before where it's, you know, oh well, we can get away with saying it to Roxanne because yeah, she's half.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I suppose even away, I said to I think it was the other day, I was doing a show with Tap and we was having this conversation on race, and I think it's because, you know, we've sometimes have just dealt with it, that we talk about it, but we're talking about something that's very serious, but we're quite
traumatic.
Yeah, but we're quite humorous about it, and I don't know if that's wrong within itself.
I think it's a coping mechanism. I know I can be quite humorous with. I think I have on situations just laughed something off, but then afterwards thought about it and been like, actually, like, what does that even mean? Or even sort of, you know, in the workplace sometimes where, you know, you might be pitching for work for tenders, and a lot of organisations are quite big on, you know, what is your stats on diversity, and, you know, being picked to go for a pitch because you're the token black person effectively to sort of show the diversity in the firm. You know, sometimes, you know, I've heard of those instances happening as well, and you know, I think it is one of them things, isn't it? It does happen.
Let me just read this one that Caesar got here. 465 says, "I'm with Malcolm X, mate. Convert liberal racism. Convert. Hold on. I'm with Malcolm X, mate. Convert. Liberal racism is more insidious."
I think it is more insidious, but so is he saying covert liberal racism is more insidious? And if by insidious he means it's something that, you know, goes under the radar, is maybe.
Well, I mean, the reality is, are they saying they would rather live somewhere that said coloured only water, coloured only toilets? Are they really saying that they prefer that over a liberal maybe taking a different view of them in private? It's just, I think they've never lived in that world, and I think if you put them in it and put them back in the UK in 2021, I can't honestly imagine anybody would opt to live in apartheid South Africa. It's just crazy.
But this is where history comes in, yeah. And like you said earlier, kind of about going back. You know what I mean? And the text is coming here. It says, "In the spirit of Sankofa, it's not a chip, it's a mountain." Now, Sankofa is, yeah, you know, Sankofa is a bird looking back, saying you have to go back and understand your history, and then come forward. And then you look at, like, for instance, when there was segregation in America. And that was probably one of the most productive times for African people in America, in the sense of they had their own Wall Street, capital, businesses booming. They had universities. Pardon?
But there's nothing stopping that from happening today. The question is, do you have more opportunities in 2021 than you would have in 1970 as a black person?
I think it depends how you come together. I mean, you have brought together BSN. You now have 5,000 members. Yeah, so it's how you bring something together. And you have come together based on what you have in common.
Well, but Anthony, you can't even compare apples with apples, because in 1970 there wasn't 5,000 black lawyers. So isn't that progress?
Yeah, okay, I can't go on with that. I can't argue with that one. Let me get to this next question here, because we've got literally 8 minutes and I want to get a roundup from Roxanne. And maybe, I think this shows how much this discussion probably, I don't know, needs to be dealt with and taken on all different levels, and how it impacts on all difference, because we're all representative here in quite a way on this show. Here we go. Hi there. On hearing about the report, I find that the collective conclusion reached by those commissioners examining whether racism exists in Britain experience, black people are still not receiving civil and social justice. In my view, we have to be honest and real and not feel so comfortable that we forget the plight of other black people. A case in point has been the pandemic. Thanks. And that's from Joe.
Yeah, I think, you know, clearly the evidence shows that black people have come out worse through COVID. There'll no doubt be a lot of research as to why that is. Presumably lack of healthcare. Is it the jobs that we're working in mean that we're more on the front line and exposed to the virus? I think the 35 black doctors that passed away, sadly, I think the comment was that often many of them didn't feel empowered enough to say, I'm not going on that ward, the PPE isn't up to standard. And other white colleagues were saying, I'm not going in there, because they felt that they wouldn't lose their job if they spoke up. How true those stories are, I don't know, but
okay. Sorry for cutting you, Carl. I just got a call. Hi, Joe.
Hi, Anthony.
Oh, can you hear Joe?
Yes, I can. I can hear you. Yes.
Carl, can you hear?
Yes. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right, you left out something that I didn't say. You left something out on here. It reads, on hearing about the report, I find the collective conclusion reached by those commissioners examining whether racism exists in Britain or not leaves a lot to be desired when they can report that institutional racism does not exist in Britain today. This is not so. The fact is that racism brings injustice and inequality and is still existing today. Have we become so resilient that we have become immune to the, immune to the continuing racism many experience? Black people are still not receiving civil and social justice, in my view. We have to be honest and real and not feel so comfortable that we forget the plight of other Black people. A case in point has been the pandemic. And just something I want to say, I'll just add this. Don't forget, history does have a habit of repeating itself. So we cannot just sit comfortably. Things can change the other way. I hear your panel saying how things have changed, and yes, they've changed, but many things still remain. And the fact is, if people go around thinking, I'm all right, Jack, that's the way things will change back the other way. You just have to look around the world. Okay, thank you.
All right, hold on a minute, Joe, because some of that was lost in, your text was lost in translation. I didn't get any of that. Any response for Joe there, guys?
Yeah, I would say, Joe, I don't disagree with anything you've said. I think I can agree with everything you've just said. I think, you know, racism does still exist today. We can't forget where we've come from, and I said we can't be complacent because, as you say, things can get worse.
It can get worse. That's what I'm trying to say, that we think we see a lot of change. We see a few changes, not a lot, because history still is here. And we think everything is okay. There may be a lot of people in professions and so on, but it just goes to prove that racism should not be existing anyway.
It shouldn't, and
in harmony or whatever. But the kind of racism that goes on, when people don't experience it, they don't have time for others who are going through it. Like Anthony said before, look at what happened to him. He was being abused on where he was living.
And Joe, I think so. The reason why, when Anthony asked me when was the last time I experienced racism, I basically said, like, for probably the first 16, 17, 18 years of my life, the answer would be every day. And it's a mix of casual and, you know, real hostile racism. So I'm not somebody who has never experienced it and has rose-tinted glasses. You know, I think a Black person living amongst white people probably experiences more racism than Black people living in Black communities. So I've certainly had more than my fair share. And maybe part of the reason why I tend to be more optimistic now is I've seen the progression that we've spoken about in my own personal life. And I think the reason why me, Kyle, and Roxanne are here on this radio station is because we are members of the Black Solicitors Network, and we certainly aren't complacent. And what we want to do with this network is to get more people into the profession to try and change things from the top down.
You even hear things about things happening to children in schools. Like something I was hearing just the other day. You know what I mean? We have to be vigilant. That's all I'm saying. Thank you for your time.
Okay then, Joe. Thank you very much for calling in. See you.
Bye.
Okay then, guys. Yeah, we've literally got about 3 minutes to go. I think we went places there, didn't we? And we just tipped on this report. You coming back again, Roxanne?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, well, if it is that you wanted me to sum up at the end now, yeah, I think, you know, in terms of the 24 recommendations, I think there's some ideas in there which, you know, is good. I think in terms of sort of, you know, the disaggregate the term of BAME, I think that could be a good thing. Also, the assistance of banks getting on board to fund, you know, sort of schemes for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. You know, those are all positive things. You know, I can't really turn around and say, well, the report is 100%, you know, wrong or anything like that, because some of the recommendations that it does make, I do agree with. But whether, you know, we actually see the fruition of those recommendations, only time will tell. And I think in terms of some of the commentary that is in the report, obviously I can see it from the other side as well, that, you know, in terms of that commentary, how could we then come to the conclusion that there isn't institutional racism in the UK, especially when there has been incidents such as Grenfell, such as the Windrush, you know, scandal that have happened in only a matter of, you know, 2 to 3 years ago, etc. So yeah, I can see it from both points, but, you know, I think we are moving in a direction. I think people are being held more accountable these days. Obviously, the rise of social media and, you know, incidents of racial discrimination being viral within a matter of hours. You know, I think hopefully long may it continue to move in the way that we want it to move, and hopefully, you know, we get to some of the conclusions that we're aiming for.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We hope to see you again soon. That would be brilliant. Kyle, any last words?
Yeah, I think for me, it's to, of course, remember our history. We can never forget the injustices that's been done to us as a community. But my message is one of try and be optimistic about the future. And I think the point I would leave on is, in terms of progress, we've just recently appointed the first ever Black woman to head the Law Society in 177 years, Stephanie Boyce.
What's her name?
Stephanie Boyce.
Okay.
Boyce. That's progress. And it's happening in small, you know, you've got to take these wins and just think we're progressing. We're all in this together. We all want to see ourselves succeed. That's why we're here. As Dan says, it's a case of just, you know, let's come together as a collective, share the experiences and progress, and, you know, do great things that we can achieve.
Excellent. Dan?
Probably nothing more to add to that other than to say thanks, as always, Anthony, for the platform to have some really interesting conversations. You know, you're never going to bring us here to not speak our minds. So I'm glad we've been able to have this chat, and I hope it's been I hope it's been interesting and useful. Yeah,
definitely, and I think yeah, I've definitely enjoyed it, and yeah, we'll have to set the next dates, and we'll be back. So enjoy, take care, nice weekend, bank holiday. Any special plans?
Enjoy
the
rain
from Land's End to John O'Groves.
Maybe.
Okay then, guys. Thank you very much, and we'll speak soon. All right, see ya. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that's it. Law at the Core, with our resident co-host Kyle, Daniel, and our special guest Roxanne, speaking with us about this disparity report, the SEUK report. Okay, time for me to go. We'll be back next week, God willing. Until then, you take care and see ya.